So I was invited out to a raw food health clinic back in the summer of 2011, and this was especially fascinating for me because I was studying nutrition on my own. I did a lot of my own research, and I was actually trying a raw food diet at the time. The weird part about this is that I ended up stealing cake at this raw food clinic. There was some cake in the refrigerator and it was frozen, so I was using a butter knife to try to stab into it to get a few pieces of sugar. My mind was screaming for the sugar, and I was horrified at what I was doing. This was not like the Rachael I had known. I had grown up as a runner, a really health foodie, so this embarrassed me, and the only reason why I got out of that kitchen was because I was so scared that someone would find me actually doing this. So I was an All-American runner at the time for Aquinas College, and I am now the author of Running in Silence, My Drive for Perfection and the Eating Disorder That Fed It. And it was this very drive for perfection that led to actually my downfall, this cake in the kitchen, and eventually a spot where I had to face all the fears I had hoped I would never face in my life. It all began when I was a senior in high school, and I've been running since I was 5 years old, so I was putting in a lot of miles. It was my main identity, something that I really cherished and loved. And I ate a lot of food, and people always made comments about it. It was pretty innocent, just, wow, Rachael, you eat so much. And by my senior year, this was really getting to me. I started to think, wow, maybe my appetite is broken. Maybe I don't eat right, and I need to fix this. So I thought the best way to fix this would be to just cut back on my portions a little bit. So I actually did start cutting back how much I was eating at each meal, and then I started counting calories, and then I found myself counting calories and recounting calories after each meal, started weighing myself, and then I started getting really interested in nutrition. So much so that I was researching in between each meal, obsessing about food, so much so that I wasn't even hanging out with my friends anymore. I had completely isolated myself from them. And I felt this growing need for food, but I thought I couldn't feed that hunger because, again, my appetite was broken. But I was running really well. Once I went to Aquinas College, I was running the best I'd ever run in my life. I remember taking off for my first college race and looking around, wondering where everyone was once I took off from the start, and I thought that I took off before the gun because I didn't see anyone. And that was actually the first time I'd ever led a race in my life. I'd never led a race in high school, and I ended up actually taking second at that race. Someone did eventually pass me, but it was the fastest I'd ever run in my life, and I felt like I was just floating across the ground. And that was the moment when I connected my control of food with success and running faster. By the end of my freshman year at Aquinas, I actually came across the raw food diet, which is eating only raw fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, nothing heated over 118 degrees, no raw meat. And I knew I wasn't going to do any type of diet. I had never been into the dieting thing, besides restricting how much I was eating. And because I was so interested in researching nutrition, I thought, well, I'll just kind of look into it. So I started looking into it, and these raw foodists, they called themselves, claimed that athletes did really well on these kind of diets. So that kind of spoke to me a little bit. And then they talked about how you could eat as much raw food as you want and not gain weight. And that was extremely appetizing to someone who felt like she couldn't eat as much as she wanted. So this was my kind of a way out of it. So ironically enough, I did actually try this raw food diet. And naturally there is going to be a lot of fruit. And I was eating a lot of fruit, but then I stumbled upon another community called 30 bananas a day. So this is a fruitarian lifestyle. And I thought this was really bizarre, but again, you can eat as much fruit as you want and not gain weight. And it looked really colorful and fun. And I thought, okay, I'll do raw food this way. So I actually started the 30 bananas a day diet and went down that bandwagon. And a lot of people look at this and think, Rachael, what were you doing? Why would you start any of this? And it was my big drive for perfection. I thought, if I just perfected food, if I fixed my body, and if I continued to run as fast and win races, I could be really happy. I wouldn't ever have to fail. That year, I was an All-American runner for Aquinas College. I was 6th at the national cross-country meet and 7th at the national track meet, and I was desperate to keep that kind of a standing. But a strange thing began to happen. I actually started eating too much food that I shouldn't have been eating for a raw food diet. And I felt so guilty about doing this. It actually led to that scene in the kitchen where I was stealing some cake. Definitely a no-no on the raw food diet. There was even a moment one night where I ended up buying 5 Luna bars and 5 Cliff bars and eating them all in one sitting very rapidly after dinner. So I was so stuffed that it felt like my stomach was going to rip. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't sit down without being in pain. And the best I could do was lie gingerly on my side on a couch at the bottom of the academic building at Aquinas College. I was in so much pain, not only physically, but emotionally, because I was so scared about what this meant for my body and my running and how much I would fail. I also didn't think this was an eating disorder. All I had ever known about eating disorders was anorexia, barely eating anything and being stick thin in the hospital, which I wasn't, or bulimia, where you're throwing up your food, and I felt like I couldn't even throw up my food when I was binge eating. And naturally, my body was starting to gain some weight, and I knew people would notice, so I decided to talk to my mom about what was going on. And I didn't tell her in person because I was too nervous to do that. So I typed up an email, waited a few days, sent it off to her, and she got it and emailed me back and said, okay, we can talk about this out at a restaurant. We can talk about your eating issues over dinner. So we met at a restaurant of all places, and she suggested I eat just 20 bananas a day instead of 30, so just restrict a little bit. And when we get home, you can step on the scale and see how much you weigh, and then we can just work down from there, and everything will be fine. For her, it was simple. Calories in, calories out, just control a little more. What she failed to realize is that I knew all about calories. I knew how to control my body, and it felt like my body was completely out of control. Because running was so important to me, I still really wanted to do well. I was part of the Aquinas cross-country team, and my body was changing. People noticed. I was gaining some weight, but everyone actually thought I was healthier than the first year when I was restricting and actually running a lot faster. So I wasn't running as fast. My body looked healthier, and my mindset was at the worst it had ever been in my life. I was restricting to try to get down to the weight I was before, to run as fast, only to end up binge eating. And I was caught in a huge, vicious, restrict, binge cycle. And I'd binge multiple times a week, much like that time where I had the 10 Luna Bar Cliff Bars. And it was so emotionally and physically exhausting. Our team made it to the national cross-country meet my sophomore year, and I was part of that team. We took 7th, which was the highest we'd ever placed as a team up until then, and it was super, super exciting. But I also felt like if I only had worked harder at losing weight, if I had just lost the weight, if I just gained the discipline and willpower, I could have done so much better for my team. And that night, my team celebrated in a hotel room. I tried to join them, and I felt a huge disconnect. I just couldn't understand them. They were talking about things I wasn't used to talking about, and it was at that point that I realized the only relationship I had ever developed was a relationship with running fast and controlling food. A year from that moment, my kneecap ended up breaking while I was running, and I endured 2 surgeries and a lot of rehab to try to get back into running. But it was that moment where I really felt like everything was crumbling around me. I was at the highest weight I had ever been, which wasn't super conducive to running at the time, and I was injured, so I wasn't really running much at all. I went from being an All-American to finishing nearly dead last in my final cross-country race. and completely destroyed my body. I thought that if I restricted food, I could fix my broken appetite. And I thought that by doing a raw food diet, I could fix the restriction that was happening, only to end up binge eating. And once I told my mom about the binge eating, I felt like it wasn't bad enough to be qualified as an eating disorder. I looked normal, so how could I get the help that I really needed? I felt like I had failed at perfection. I felt like I had failed at having control over food. I felt like I had failed at all of my dreams surrounding running and running fast. I had not only lost my body, I had lost the one thing I really loved, my running. I had also missed out on experiences with my teammates and my friends. I felt like I had lost my voice, and I had lost myself.